Part 4, The Shadows of Betrayal. Hours later, as they lay together on Jarek's makeshift bedroll, their bodies cooling in the temple's dim light, Lasara traced patterns on his chest with her azure fingers. In Zinthari culture, she murmured, what we just did would typically follow a formal bonding ceremony spanning several days. Jarek chuckled, his voice low and rough. Sorry for rushing you. Don't be, she replied, her violet eyes twinkling. Humans have a refreshing directness that my people could learn from. Besides, she added, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper, I've been curious about human mating practices for quite some time. Just curious, he teased, pulling her closer. Professional interest, she deadpanned before breaking into a smile. Though I must say, the practical application exceeded theoretical expectations. Through their bond, he could feel her contentment mingled with lingering desire, creating a feedback loop of intimacy unlike anything he'd experienced before. So, Jarek said, pressing a kiss to her silver hair, about this bonding ritual the Guardian mentioned. The journey back through the canyon was easier than their outbound trek. Despite the lingering weakness from the life force transfer, Jarek felt strangely energized, whether from their newfound connection or the afterglow of their intimacy, he couldn't say. Lasara walked beside him, her restored azure skin gleaming in the harsh sunlight, occasionally brushing her hand against his in a gesture that sent ripples of pleasure through their bond. I still can't believe I'm feeling your emotions, Jarek said as they navigated around a fallen boulder. It's like having a second set of feelings layered over my own. Lasara smiled, her silver hair catching the light. Zinthari have legends about such connections. Soul bindings, we call them. I always thought they were just romantic myths. And now we're living one, Jarek replied, returning her smile. Through their bond, he sensed her contentment mingled with lingering concern about the permanence of their connection. By the time they reached the Starblade, the twin suns were setting, painting the desert landscape in shades of amber and gold. Jarek felt a wave of relief at the sight of their ship, a battered but reliable sanctuary amid the alien ruins. Home sweet home, he murmured, punching in the access code. The airlock hissed open, welcoming them with cool, filtered air. As they stepped inside, the ship systems automatically activated, lights flickering on and the environmental controls adjusting to their presence. Ship status report, Jarek called out, helping Lasara settle onto the common area couch despite her protests that she felt fine. He could sense her fatigue through their bond. All systems nominal, the AI responded. You have one pending transmission from Director Valen. Priority, Alpha. Jarek and Lasara exchanged glances. Valen was their employer at the Galactic Heritage Foundation, the organization funding their expedition to recover the stellar core. Priority Alpha messages were rare. Play transmission, Jarek ordered, sinking down beside Lasara. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Director Valen, a human male in his 60s with steel-gray hair and the rigid posture of a former military officer. Voss, Tail, he began without preamble, using their surnames in his typical formal manner. I trust your mission is proceeding according to parameters. However, new intelligence has come to light regarding the Zinthari artifact you're seeking. Valen's expression grew even more serious. The stellar core was not, as previously believed, designed primarily as a preservation tool. That was a secondary function. Its primary purpose was weaponization, specifically, mass transmutation of organic matter for military applications. Lasara gasped softly beside Jarek, her azure fingers tightening around his. According to recently decrypted Zinthari war records, Valen continued, the core could be calibrated to affect specific genetic markers, allowing for targeted petrification of enemy populations while leaving allies unharmed. This capability is what led to the Zinthari civilization's dominance, and ultimately, their downfall when the technology was turned against them. Jarek felt Lasara's horror through their bond, mirroring his own growing unease. Your new objective is to secure the core and all related documentation for immediate transport to GHF headquarters. Under no circumstances should you attempt to activate the device. The potential for catastrophic misuse is extreme. Valen out. The transmission ended, leaving them in stunned silence. A weapon, Lysara finally whispered, her violet eyes wide. All this time, I thought we were recovering a cultural treasure, a scientific marvel. But it's a weapon of mass destruction. Yarrick ran a hand over his shaved head, processing the implications. A weapon that nearly killed you. Through their bond, he could feel Lysara's academic curiosity battling with moral revulsion. As a xenoarchaeologist, she was trained to preserve and study artifacts, not destroy them. But as someone who had experienced the core's power firsthand, she understood its dangers better than anyone. We can't give this to Valen, she said finally, her azure skin paling slightly. The GHF charter explicitly prohibits weapons research. If he's requesting it despite knowing its true purpose, then he's not planning to lock it away in some museum. Yarrick finished grimly, the question is, what do we do now? Lysara stood and began pacing, her silver hair swinging with each turn. We need to understand it better before making any decisions. The Restoration Temple might have more information about how the core works, and potentially how to neutralize it. Yarrick watched her, admiring her analytical approach even in crisis. Through their bond, he could sense her determination cutting through fear and doubt. We should rest first, he suggested, rising to join her. You've literally just returned from being Crystal, and I'm still recovering from giving you a decade of my life. We're no good to anyone exhausted. Lysara turned to him, her expression softening. You're right. And I need time to process everything, both this news and, she gestured between them, us. Having second thoughts, he asked, only half joking. She stepped closer, placing her azure palm against his chest. Not about you. Never about you. But everything else has suddenly become very complicated. Through their bond, Yarrick felt her sincerity and beneath it a current of desire that hadn't diminished despite their current predicament. He pulled her against him, taking comfort in her warmth and solidity after days of her being cold crystal. We'll figure it out, he promised, pressing his lips to her forehead. Together. Later, as they lay in his narrow bunk, Lysara traced the contours of his face with her fingertips, her touch feather-light. Part 3, The Price of Salvation. The Restoration Temple's entrance was smaller than the previous pyramid, its triangular doorway barely tall enough for Yarrick to enter without stooping. Unlike the first structure, this one bore intricate carvings across its entire surface, scenes depicting figures transforming from flesh to crystal and back again. Looks like we're in the right place, Yarrick muttered, carefully maneuvering the hover sled through the narrow opening. Inside, the air was surprisingly cool and carried a faint electric charge that made the hair on Jarrek's arms stand on end. The main chamber was circular, with a raised platform at its center surrounded by 7 stone pillars. Each pillar was inscribed with symbols similar to those on the stellar core. Yarrick guided Lysara's cracking form onto the central platform, then stepped back to examine the chamber. Now what? As if in response to his voice, the symbols on the pillars began to glow with the same blue light he'd seen in the first temple. The light intensified, then coalesced into a humanoid figure standing before him, a holographic projection of a Zinthari. The being was tall and slender, with iridescent skin that shifted colors as it moved. Its face was vaguely insectoid, with compound eyes that seemed to assess Yarrick with cold calculation. Visitor, it spoke, its voice resonating from all directions at once. You seek restoration for this one. It gestured toward Lysara with one of its upper arms. Yes, Yarrick replied, instinctively straightening his posture. Can you help her? The hologram tilted its head. The restoration chamber serves those who understand its purpose, and its price. I must determine if you are worthy. Before Yarrick could respond, the chamber darkened, and images began to flash around him, scenes from Zinthari history, symbols and equations, cultural practices and rituals. What is the primary function of the stellar core? The hologram asked. Yarrick recalled Lasara's notes. Preservation. It was designed to protect Zinthari during catastrophes or long space journeys by converting them temporarily to crystal. The hologram nodded. And what is the sacred law of transformation? This wasn't in Lasara's notes. Yarrick hesitated, then took an educated guess based on what he'd seen. That it must be reversible. That life must be preserved. Acceptable, the Guardian conceded. Final question, what is your intention toward this one? It gestured again to Lasara. Yarrick glanced at her crystalline form, now covered in an intricate web of fractures. Some had deepened alarmingly during their journey, particularly those across her face and chest. I want to save her, he said simply. That is not a complete answer, the hologram pressed. What is she to you? Yarrick felt a flash of irritation. Does it matter? She's dying. It matters greatly, the Guardian replied, unperturbed by his outburst. The restoration process requires an exchange. Life force must balance. The giver must have sufficient connection to the receiver. Understanding dawned on Yarrick. You're saying I need to give her some of my life energy. Correct. The stronger the connection, the more effective the transfer. Those bound by mere obligation provide weak energy. Those bound by deeper emotions provide stronger restoration. Yarrick looked at Lasara again, taking in her frozen expression of fear and the silver hair now dulled by a coating of crystalline dust. He thought of their years working together, the gradual shift from professional respect to friendship to something more that neither had acknowledged. She's everything, he admitted, the words coming easier than he expected. My partner, my friend, the person I trust most in this galaxy. And if I'm being honest, she's the woman I've fallen for, even though I've been too stubborn to admit it. The hologram studied him for a long moment. Your connection is sufficient. Be warned, this exchange will transfer approximately 1 decade of your lifespan to her. For humans, this is significant. Do it, Yarrick said without hesitation. Very well. Place your hands on the receiver and prepare for the transfer. Yarrick stepped onto the platform and gently placed his palms on Lasara's crystalline shoulders, careful to avoid the deepest cracks. The hologram began an incantation in the Zinthari language, and the pillar's glow intensified until the entire chamber was bathed in blue light. A sensation like ice water flooding his veins made Yarrick gasp. Energy seemed to flow from his core, down his arms, and into Lasara's crystalline form. The process was painful, like being slowly drained of blood, but he gritted his teeth and maintained contact. Through squinted eyes, he watched in amazement as the fractures on Lasara's surface began to seal themselves. The crystalline texture of her skin softened, patches of azure beginning to show through the glassy exterior. Hold the connection, the hologram instructed as Yarrick's knees threatened to buckle. The process must complete fully. The drain on his energy intensified. Black spots danced in Yarrick's vision, and he felt decades older, his muscles burning with fatigue. Just as he thought he might pass out, the blue light pulsed once more, then faded. Under his hands, Lasara's shoulders were no longer crystalline but flesh, warm and yielding. The transformation spread rapidly, the glassy exterior receding like tidewaters until she stood before him, fully restored. Her violet eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. Yarrick. She whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. He managed a weak smile before his legs finally gave out. The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was Lasara lunging forward to catch him, their roles now reversed. Consciousness returned to Yarrick in fragments, first the cool stone beneath him, then the lingering ache in his muscles, and finally the sensation of something warm and soft cradling his head. He opened his eyes to find Lasara's face hovering above his, her silver hair cascading around them like a metallic waterfall. "Welcome back," she said softly, relief evident in her violet eyes. Yarrick tried to sit up but found his limbs uncooperative. "How long was I out?" "About 3 hours," Lasara replied, helping him into a sitting position. "You gave me quite a scare." The events before his collapse came rushing back, the energy transfer, watching crystal transform to flesh, Lasara's eyes opening just before darkness claimed him. He studied her now, drinking in the sight of her restored form. The vibrant azure of her skin seemed more luminous than he remembered, almost radiant with inner light. "It worked," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're really back." Lasara nodded, her fingers brushing against his cheek in a gesture that felt both familiar and new. "Thanks to you. I remember bits and pieces of being crystal, like fragments of a dream. I could hear you sometimes, talking to me, caring for me." Heat rose in Jarek's face as he recalled the confessions he'd made to her crystalline form, thinking she couldn't hear him. "How much do you remember?" A smile played at the corners of her lips. "Enough to know you've been hiding things from me." Yarrick chuckled weakly. "Guilty as charged." As they sat together in the dim light of the temple, a strange sensation washed over Yarrick, a wave of warmth and affection that didn't seem to originate from within. It felt internal, like someone else's emotions bleeding into his consciousness. "Did you feel that?" he asked, startled. Lasara's eyes widened. "You can sense it too?" "I thought it was just me." "What's happening?" "I think," she hesitated, her azure fingers intertwining with his, "the life force transfer created some kind of bond between us. I can feel echoes of your emotions, and apparently, you can feel mine." Yarrick absorbed this information, trying to separate his surprise from what might be Lasara's emotions flowing through this unexpected connection. "Is this normal for your people? When they share life energy?" "No," she admitted. "Zinthari can share energy in certain sacred rituals, but nothing like this. This is something unique to the restoration process, I think." As if summoned by their discussion, the holographic guardian materialized before them, its iridescent form shifting colors in the dim light. "The bond formed is unexpected but not unprecedented," it observed, its multi-tone voice reverberating through the chamber. "When species mix, such connections can occur. Your consciousnesses now overlap at certain frequencies." Yarrick struggled to his feet, Lasara rising beside him, her hands still firmly clasped in his. "What bond? What did you do to us?" "I did nothing beyond what was requested," the hologram replied. "The life force transfer created a sympathetic resonance between your energetic patterns. Your consciousness is now overlapped at certain frequencies." Lasara stepped forward. "Is it permanent?" "It will stabilize or dissolve within one planetary cycle. If you wish it to remain, you must complete the bonding ritual at the primary temple. If you wish it to fade, simply allow time to pass." With that cryptic pronouncement, the guardian dissolved back into particles of light, leaving them alone once more. Part 2, The Bond of Fire and Ice. Yarrick cradled Lasara's crystalline form against his chest, his muscles straining under her newfound weight. What had once been a lithe, agile body was now as heavy as solid quartz. The cube on the altar continued to pulse with an eerie blue light, its glow casting long shadows across the chamber. "Damn it," Yarrick muttered, backing away slowly. He couldn't risk the artifact affecting him too. If he turned to crystal, Lasara would have no chance. The journey back through the ruins was arduous. Each step required careful balance as he carried his crystalline partner, her frozen expression of terror a constant reminder of his failure to protect her. By the time he reached their ship, the twin suns were setting, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. The Starblade, their modified cargo hauler, wasn't much to look at. Its hull was scarred from countless missions, and its engines were held together by sheer willpower. But it was home. Yarrick carefully maneuvered through the airlock, placing Lasara's crystalline form gently on the medical bay examination table. "Ship, full diagnostic scan," he ordered, his voice hoarse from exertion. The medical scanner hummed to life, bathing Lasara in a soft green light. Yarrick watched the readouts with growing frustration. "Unknown material composition," the ship's AI reported. "Outer layer appears to be crystalline silica with trace elements similar to Xinthari biology. Internal structure maintains biological patterns but has been transmuted to a crystalline state." "Is she?" Yarrick hesitated, dreading the answer. "Is she still alive in there?" "Inconclusive," the AI replied. "Minimal energy signature detected, but insufficient data to determine consciousness." Yarrick ran a hand over his shaved head, leaving a trail of sweat and dust. Damn it. He spent the next hour cleaning himself up and securing the ship for the night. There was no way he was leaving Zyros without finding a cure. After a quick meal of reconstituted protein, he returned to the medical bay with Lasara's personal data tablet. "Let's see what you were studying before we came here," he murmured, as if she could hear him. The tablet was password protected, but Yarrick had picked up a few tricks in his years as a mercenary. 3 attempts later, he was in. Lasara's password had been Starlight, something she'd once told him was the most beautiful thing she'd seen in her travels. Her research files were extensive, translations of Xinthari texts, notes on their civilization, theories about the stellar core. Yarrick wasn't a scholar, but years of working with alien scientists had taught him enough to follow the basics. "Here we go," he muttered, finding a folder labeled Core Legends. According to Lasara's notes, the Xinthari had created the stellar core as a tool for terraforming barren worlds. By manipulating energy at a fundamental level, it could transform lifeless planets into thriving ecosystems. But the core had a darker purpose: it could also be used as a weapon, capable of devastating entire star systems. "The process was meant to be reversible," Yarrick said, glancing at Lasara's crystalline form. "There has to be a way." Deeper in Lasara's notes, he found references to a restoration chamber located in another Xinthari temple complex on the far side of Zyros. According to the ancient texts, those transformed by the core could be returned to their original state there. "That's where we're heading tomorrow," he told her, settling into a chair beside the examination table. First light. As the ship's systems cycled down for the night, Yarrick found himself talking to Lasara's crystalline form, telling her stories from his past missions, confessing fears he'd never shared with anyone. Something about her silent presence made it easier to open up. "You know," he said, brushing a finger along the curve of her crystalline shoulder, "when we first teamed up, I thought you were just another academic who'd slow me down. Shows what I know, right? You've saved my ass more times than I can count." He leaned back in his chair, his voice softening. "When we get you back, there's a lot I want to tell you. Things I should have said before." The next morning, Yarrick jolted awake at the ship's automated alert. He'd fallen asleep in the chair beside Lasara's crystalline form, his hand still resting on her arm. "Ship, what is it?" he grumbled, stretching his stiff muscles. "Anomalous structural changes detected in specimen," the AI responded coolly. Fully alert now, Yarrick leaned closer to examine Lasara. In the harsh medical bay lighting, he spotted what had triggered the alert: a network of hairline fractures spreading across her left shoulder and down her arm. "Analysis," he ordered, running his fingertips gently over the cracks. "Material degradation consistent with improper molecular bonding. Estimated time to catastrophic structural failure, 48 to 72 hours. Yarrick swore under his breath. The transformation wasn't stable. Lasara was literally falling apart. "Prep the engines," he ordered, already moving to the cockpit. "We need to reach the restoration temple immediately." While the ship systems came online, Yarrick returned to Lasara's research. The temple complex was located on the opposite side of the planet, a 6-hour flight through Zyro's turbulent atmosphere, followed by an overland journey through a canyon system too narrow for the ship to navigate. Cutting it close, he muttered, plotting the fastest possible route. As the Starblade lifted off, Yarrick secured Lysara's crystalline form in a padded cargo harness. The last thing he needed was for her to topple over during the flight and shatter. "Hold on," he told her, carefully wrapping protective padding around the areas where the cracks were most prominent. "I'm not losing you to some ancient alien tech." The flight was rough, with atmospheric storms buffeting the ship. Yarrick pushed the engines harder than was strictly safe, his eyes constantly flicking between the navigation console and the medical bay monitor showing Lysara's condition. New fractures were appearing every hour, spreading like a web across her crystalline surface. During a particularly violent bout of turbulence, Yarrick found himself reminiscing about their first mission together. Lysara had been fresh from the Galactic University, all academic theories and no practical experience. He'd been assigned as her security detail for what should have been a routine excavation on Proxima 4. "Remember that nest of tunnel vipers we disturbed?" he said aloud, knowing she couldn't respond but needing to fill the silence. "You were so busy translating those wall carvings you didn't even notice them until one was wrapped around your leg. I've never seen anyone move so fast, or curse in so many languages." He smiled at the memory. "That's when I knew you weren't just another bookworm. You had fire." The ship sensors indicated they were approaching the coordinates. Below them stretched a vast canyon network, carved by ancient rivers long since dried up. At its center, barely visible against the rocky terrain, stood another pyramid structure, smaller than the first but unmistakably of Zinthari design. "This is as close as I can get," Yarrick muttered, finding a relatively flat area to set the ship down. The Restoration Temple was still several kilometers away through winding canyon passages. He worked quickly, packing essential supplies and weapons. The scanner showed the fractures on Lysara's form were accelerating, spreading across her torso and beginning to appear on her face. One particularly deep crack ran from her left eye down her cheek, giving her the appearance of shedding a crystalline tear. "I'm going to carry you there, Lysara," he told her as he carefully wrapped her in shock-absorbing material. "It's going to be rough, but I'll get you through this." The desert heat hit him like a physical blow as he exited the ship, Lysara's wrapped form secured to a hover sled he'd rigged from spare parts. The twin suns were directly overhead, turning the canyon into an oven. Yarrick stripped off his shirt again, the fabric already soaked with sweat, and began the arduous journey. Every step was a battle against the terrain and time. The hover sled helped, but navigating the narrow passages required constant attention. Several times, he had to lift Lysara's crystalline form manually, his muscles straining with the effort. During one such moment, as he carefully maneuvered her over a fallen boulder, Yarrick found himself face to face with her crystalline visage. Despite the spreading cracks, her beauty remained evident, the delicate curve of her lips, the high cheekbones that had always fascinated him. He'd never told her how captivating he found the contrast between her azure skin and silver hair, how her violet eyes seemed to hold ancient wisdom. "When you're back," he promised, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm done pretending there's nothing between us. Life's too short, even for your species." Lysara's people, the Zinthari, typically lived twice as long as humans. She'd once joked that was why she preferred human company, they lived with an urgency her own kind lacked. Part 1, The Forgotten World. The twin suns of Zyros burned relentlessly in the sky, their harsh light casting long shadows over the barren landscape. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay, a reminder of the planet's forgotten past. Once a thriving hub of civilization, Zyros now lay in ruins, its cities swallowed by time and sand. Commander Yarrick Voss adjusted the strap of his pulse rifle, his boots crunching against the cracked ground. His shaved head glistened with sweat, and his muscular frame bore the scars of countless battles. Beside him, Lysara Tail, a Zinthari scientist, scanned the horizon with her holographic device. Her smooth, azure skin shimmered under the sunlight, and her silver hair, tied in an intricate braid, caught the light like liquid metal. "How much further?" Yarrick asked, his voice rough from the dry air. Lysara glanced at her device, her violet eyes narrowing. "The energy signature is strongest just beyond that ridge. The stellar core should be there." Yarrick grunted, shifting the weight of his gear. "Good. The sooner we find this thing, the sooner we can get off this rock." The stellar core was the reason they had come to Zyros. Legend spoke of an ancient artifact capable of manipulating energy on a cosmic scale. Some called it a tool of creation, others a weapon of destruction. To Yarrick, it was just another job. But to Lysara, it was a chance to uncover the secrets of a lost civilization. As they crested the ridge, the ruins of an ancient city came into view. Towering structures of stone and metal rose from the sand, their surfaces etched with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change as they moved. At the center of the city stood a massive pyramid, its obsidian surface gleaming with an unnatural light. "That's it," Lysara whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The Temple of the Stellar Core." Jarek's instincts kicked in, his eyes scanning for potential threats. "Stay alert. Just because this place looks dead doesn't mean it is." They descended into the ruins, passing between towering columns adorned with shifting symbols. The air grew cooler as they approached the pyramid, its surface warm to the touch. Lysara consulted her device, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface. "The entrance should be on the eastern face," she said. According to the ancient texts, the temple was aligned with the rising of the lesser sun. Yarrick nodded, impressed despite himself. Lysara's knowledge had saved them more times than he could count. She was more than just a scientist, she was a survivor. They found the entrance exactly where Lysara had predicted. A triangular doorway, barely visible against the dark surface of the pyramid, began to glow with a faint blue light as they approached. "It's recognizing our presence," Lysara said, her voice hushed with excitement. "The systems are still active after all this time." Yarrick drew his sidearm, his grip firm. "Let me go first." The interior of the pyramid was surprisingly well preserved, illuminated by the same blue glow that had greeted them at the entrance. The air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Their footsteps echoed on stone floors that seemed to absorb and release the sound in subtle waves. At the center of the main chamber stood an altar, a simple rectangular block of the same obsidian-like material as the pyramid's exterior. Resting atop it was a small, unassuming cube that pulsed with an inner light. "That's it," Lysara breathed, moving forward with reverent steps. "The stellar core." Yarrick caught her arm, his voice firm. "Wait. This is too easy. Check for traps." Lysara nodded, scanning the room with her device. No active security measures detected. The ancient Zinthari relied on isolation and secrecy to protect their treasures, not booby traps. Still cautious, Yarrick approached the altar first, examining it from all angles before giving Lysara the all-clear. She stepped forward eagerly, her scientific curiosity overriding caution. The texts described it as the solid form of energy itself, she murmured, leaning closer to examine the symbols etched into the cube's surface. It's said to be able to transform matter at its most fundamental level. Her finger accidentally brushed against one of the symbols, which flared with brilliant light. Before Yarrick could react, a beam shot from the cube directly into Lysara's chest. She stumbled backward with a cry of shock. "Yarrick," she gasped, looking down at her hands in horror. Yarrick watched in disbelief as patches of crystalline material began to spread across her azure skin, hardening into what appeared to be glass. The transformation crept up her arms like frost on a window, her movements slowing as the crystalline structure consumed her. "Hold on!" Yarrick shouted, lunging forward to catch her just as her legs turned rigid. Lysara's violet eyes locked onto his, filled with fear and desperation. Help me. But before Yarok could respond, the last traces of her azure skin vanished beneath the advancing crystal. Within seconds, he found himself holding not his partner but a perfectly detailed statue of her, frozen in a moment of terror. Lasara, he whispered, cradling her crystalline form carefully. The cube on the altar continued to pulse with an eerie blue light, seemingly satisfied with its handiwork. Jarek's mind raced as he realized the truth: the stellar core was not just a tool. It was a weapon. And he would do whatever it took to save Lasara.